All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Peter Benton. I'm the president and CEO of Worldwide Clinical Trials, and I'm very honored to have a fantastic panel today talking about some very important topics. Today, to the Endpoint series, we're going to be talking about principles of governance and oversight, sponsors and CROs, getting it right from day one, and all of the hidden landmines that we need to make sure that we avoid. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists and moderator. All right, so we've got a very fantastic panelist of biotech leaders here with us today. But most importantly, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Halloran and introduce my moderator, Lori Halloran, President, CEO, and founder of the Halloran Group. Hello, Lori.
Hi. And do you want me to introduce the panel, or do you want to go ahead and...
Sure, I'll do a quick introduction, and we've got the names and titles up there, but do a quick...
Okay. Well, we won't spend a huge amount of time on this since we only have an hour. So you can read faster than I can speak. So thank you all for joining, and we can jump right into it. I think we have a couple polls, but this group is top notch as far as weighing in. So what we want to really do is just get right to the weighing in. So our first poll: when is the right time to set up a governance framework?
That's 34 responses.
Excellent. Are we going to see the results before we jump into the discussion? So this was part of our discussion as we were preparing, because if you come right out of the gate in a good place, we have all three. Okay, this is great. So the big answer is you don't wait until you have problems. You do it as early as you possibly can. And what I'd like to do is jump right into the discussion with our panel to ask you, why is this important, and when do you specifically do it? So I'll start out by calling on, I know Carrie, this was a big part of our discussion early on. So maybe I could start with Carrie, and then I'll move to Marissa.
Yeah, sure. So from my perspective, Lori and team, this is something, first of all, it is an ongoing process, but this is not something that should wait, to your point, until an issue comes. I feel really strongly that the best way to set this up is from the very beginning, when you're almost like at a kickoff meeting, because then you can establish expectations. You can set the standard for how you're going to operate as a partner, right? And it should be set up as a partnership, because they really are an extension of you and the company and the team. So for me, it's really important to get this started early on, such that you can have those ongoing discussions and you can continue to feed off of each other and leverage each other, and that you're not waiting until there's issues and then you're just not happy with each other.
It gets all the hard stuff discussed ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. When do you do it? Or
Me?
When's your goal?
So my goal, because I stepped into a company that already had, the CROs in place, and they didn't have any governance in place, none. So I established that right away with the larger vendors that we work with. Ideally for me, I would start talking about it at the bid defense. Just who would be on the team, who would be part of the governance, what is the governance structure that they're used to. I work in a small company, so we may not need the 3 different layers, but we definitely need to have an executive type of layer, and then the joint operating committee type of layer. So really from the very beginning, for me, is ideal. You start that conversation at the bid defense so that they're prepared for that and they're planning.
I'll ask Marissa to weigh in, and then I'll see if anybody else has a comment to add.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what Carrie was saying. It's so important to do it from the beginning, and I know not everybody gets that opportunity, and you do end up joining companies where, like Carrie said, you come in and there's no governance. And for me, when I've been in those situations, that's one of my big priorities when I first join, is let's get that governance in place. When you're able to start from scratch, I agree, the bid defense is critical. It's important to know before you select, your partner, that they agree that their governance is needed. And then I like to start getting it up and running right away once they get the award and there's some sort of startup agreement or contract in place so that, again, like everyone's saying, we don't wait for things to happen wrong on either side. It goes to both sponsor and your partner.
Totally agree, Marissa.
Okay. Terry, can you weigh in on what should be the most senior person's focus when you're setting up this governance and oversight process?
So,
And you said, perfect. Sorry, you said Terry, not Carrie. Thank you.
sorry, Carrie.
No.
So I've had the kind of privilege of being in both situations that Marissa and Carrie spoke of, doing it from the beginning and then stepping into it. So setting it up from the beginning, it was really critical that we had a CEO to CEO connection, so that we could talk more strategically about it. And then at the chief medical officer to an equivalent in the CRO side. And we even incorporated that into the bid defense process and had separate dinners to discuss kind of the philosophies of the companies, what were important things to us as a sponsor, how it fit in with what was important to the CRO. So I can restate that I think from the CEO level, you need to have a connection. Now, we just did quarterly meetings at the CEO level, but they were important meetings because it was a chance for them to talk about what had occurred and ways forward and strategic things that both companies were doing.
Okay. So Peter's thrown in a question. As a CRO, I'm so surprised by the number of companies that don't want governance. Why do you think that might be? This is not in our planned questions, but I think there will be some good answers to unpack here. Kelly, do you want to weigh in here?
Sure. I'm trying to think why I wouldn't want governance, but that's from my perspective, get it in and get it fast set up. But there are lots of reasons. A lot of the small companies don't feel they need it. So you're running one trial and you have a CRO partner and it's really not a thought at that stage. Just get it set up and get it running is sort of the MO versus how are we going to make this successful in the long run. So I think it's sort of a short-term vision of get in a first patient. That kind of short-sightedness, I'd say, is the number one reason small companies at least don't set it up. Not to say we don't want to govern properly, though they may not know whether governance, how that helps and what that means, but really just an expedient piece.
So they want to rush straight to the activity and they don't want to sit down and think about
Right.
what they really need to do to make it work well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they may not know. And the small company may not know.
Yeah, that's fairly.
Lori, may I add something? This is Mark.
Yeah, you were going to be next on my list.
Oh, good. Well, maybe I'll preempt the next question. But I think sometimes with a smaller company, they may not think strategically, and they may not really understand the value of developing that relationship from the start. They're just looking very short term, just to get to the next phase or get the first approval. So that would be a comment I would make as well.
So if you were thinking about how to best frame it so that it starts out in the right way, what type of people would you have, and what would be the frequency of the meetings that you would automatically propose?
Laurie, this is Tony. Can I just add one thing to the comment about that? Because I've also seen it from the other side where the CROs have said they don't want to set up governance.
Okay.
And I think the reason is the same for both the sponsor and the CRO. When you talk about governance, a lot of people have a tendency to think in terms of, these large groups that get together. I'm going to have all of these different levels of governance. I'm going to have an executive governance. I'm going to have a functional governance. I'm going to have an operational governance. They think of it in terms of governance gone wild. And, I don't have the resources to put into that from the sponsor side or from the CRO side. I don't have enough business with you to warrant the investment. I actually have had CROs say to me, your client isn't large enough to warrant the expense of governance.
Yeah.
And I think that what people have a tendency to lose sight on is there is not a one size fits all to governance.
Correct.
And I deal mostly with smaller companies, and it's, let's set up strictly an operational governance. We can have some executive involvement, but for the most part, we're going to focus on operations and use it as a way to do a series of lessons learned meeting every quarter. So set objectives, get together at the end of the quarter. How did you do against those objectives, and set your objectives in the next quarter? So really looking at it is how are the two organizations working together and how can you work together better, and also use it as a mechanism to reward team members for going above and beyond. So you really can look at governance not necessarily as this large, multifaceted, large group of people getting together once a quarter looking at metrics, but how can we focus the organizations?
Okay. Well, that's a small company view. Ultragenics is a slightly larger view, and you've had other bigger companies that you've worked with, Mark. What would you say is the best practice for a bigger company with multiple vendors and multiple programs at each vendor?
Well, for me, what we've done recently at Ultragenics was we try to categorize the different types of vendors that we work with. Mm-hmm. So we have strategic, obviously being the CROs, the central lab, safety, crucial being more the specialty labs and the imaging and ePro and IWRS, and then key. So what we're trying to do is, and I'm not sure, I would say I can apply this to a larger company space, is really deciding the level of governance, but focusing on the strategic, crucial, and key. That's what we're focusing on. So we may have, for transactional or we're calling legacy, but we may have smaller forms of governance, maybe annual. There may be a few performance metrics thrown in there for good purpose, but for the most part, we're focusing on the strategic, crucial, and key vendors. And one challenge I have, where I work, I think it's common knowledge. Our CEO is very skeptical about us spending money outside with, especially CROs. And so for me personally, trying to get our CEO to the table in an executive governance fashion has been a real challenge. So I don't rest there. I decided, early on I've been with Ultragenics for 7.5 years. I decided early on to just build what I could, and then hopefully over time have our CEO and other executives be appreciative of what we've built. But I think for me, it's a quarterly governance is the frequency. I think going beyond that, especially for the strategic or crucial vendors, just doesn't give you the focus that you need in order to make course corrections over the course of the time. And we do have our VPs of clinical involved. We do have our program leads involved. We don't have study level personnel attend. We have finance attend. We have patient advocacy attend at times if it's indicated. So it really is meant to be fit for purpose depending upon the type of vendor that we're using.
And Mark, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Sorry. Do you have QA involved as well?
Yes, thank you so much. We've been partnering for our strategic and crucial to also have quality technical agreements put in as part of the governance. So we have done, I think, a good job lately on defining the study level metrics and then working with QA on more of the quality level metrics. Those are tended by them, and then they're brought up at the governance meetings, and they attend those, and we talk about any trends or any corrective actions that need to happen. And then we have what my team runs is more of the vendor related metrics, and we're trying to do all. I have category management's way I've set it up, and each category manager has the same 3 metrics that they're going to work on with those vendors that they're responsible for. So that's the way we've done it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Great.
So you've alluded a couple times to the finance piece. I know that many clinical development people are really uncomfortable with the financial oversight. How have you set that up? Who does what?
For us, we work very, very closely with our FP&A group, from the initial budget to any change orders and so forth that comes in. We look at them as a partner, and I can understand in certain situations you don't want finance involved because you're trying to get to more of the clinical meat of what you want to do together. But we look at that as a partnership. So they come, we talk about the amount of revenue that they've received on a given trial for the vendor. We talk about any open invoice action items. We talk about projections for accruals that may be needed to be just tightened up. And then we talk about any processes. Sometimes, we're asking for more stringent backup documentation for certain invoices with certain CROs. So we want to partner with them. And so far, it's been very successful, very, very fortunate. Because I have worked at other companies where that wasn't the case, and it did feel more punitive in that regard, Lori.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lori, just one thing to add to that.
Yeah, and my turn to you, so this is perfect.
In my previous life, before my current situation, my current job, we even set up sort of some guidance with our CRO partners around the finance piece. So we cleared up all the expectations about what we wanted and what they needed to deliver, and actually put it together as part of the governance document. So there were no questions about it. And we certainly partnered with our finance colleagues, but I also had within the oversight group a financial person who helped the clinical side within the company deal better with the CROs.
Okay. So the clinical project leaders didn't really need to do that. They had somebody that was much more finance oriented.
Well, they still needed to do stuff, but they had some support. So before it went to the FP&A group, they had support on better understanding the accruals, understanding what they were asking for, and what they were receiving.
It's something that I'm setting up right now, Lori and Terry, at X4. We have somebody that is external, but we're going to be hiring him in, hopefully. But he's doing just that, helping the team have a better appreciation for what the financials are that they're, the CRO and the vendors are charging, what it's for, negotiating some of those, going back and negotiating some of those. And then certainly we also partner with our finance team to go through the accruals, versus the actuals versus, the expectations. So.
Okay. So.
And I definitely see that as sorry, Lori. I see that as a gap in a lot.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You see it as a gap.
That's all right. I do see that financial piece as a gap a lot of times, and it does cause trouble down the line. So having a good discussion at the study level, what are they responsible for? What do they control, and when it has to go up is a really big a big point of contention often at the study team level.
We're actually building in a new budget. What does it mean for you in the operations space versus as the ops lead versus the finance team. So. Because I agree with you. I think ClinOps team, as a general rule, they know that they're supposed to be sort of managing the budget, but they feel like they're not financial people, so they're not quite sure what that means. So we're trying to introduce some good training on that.
What I was going to segue a little bit, because you are all, I'm sure, able to help our question asker, Laverne, with a response to what's the best way to continue to show the value of the strategic relationship and governance. If I can have maybe a couple people just demonstrate what they've done. Well, that's managing up, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's easy, right? When you have a strategic relationship and you're managing it, you're not going to have those big problems that come up, right? We've all had those moments where, the major problem has happened and we weren't even aware of it. So the problems are much smaller that you're encountering. And then when you need each other, during inspections and stuff, it's pretty seamless. You're not, everybody's not pointing fingers around the table of who's responsible for what. It's just one team situation. And I think most companies are starting to understand the value of governance and having people dedicated to that. It's relationship management too, right? So when the going gets tough, you have those relationships built to draw upon.
Sure.
I think the relationship piece is the most important piece. It is the foundation of that house that you are building together. And if you don't have that trusting relationship, things are not going to go well. They just aren't. Historically, we've shown that again and again and again. And so for me, for lack of saying it better, I've kind of shoved it down their throats in terms of we are partnering. We are going to have a really positive working relationship, a trusting relationship with each other. No, everything's not going to go perfectly. It's not going to go perfectly if we keep everything in-house. I can assure you of that too. Yeah. So it's just showing it in real time that, we're not having these major things, to Terry's point, because we're finding out about them when we can help put out those little fires, and it's not a big forest fire.
Absolutely.
And Lori, I may add that, now we're focusing more on risk management. And I think if you want to show, the benefit of having governance, and you look at the risk log and you're able to demonstrate the lowering of those risks and that the deliverables are getting done and the approvals are coming, then I think it speaks for itself as well.
And that's
Yeah.
really how you're documenting your oversight for ICHE 6R2. Absolutely.
I think Laurie too, looking at metrics, right? And really seeing how, when I think about data and the cleanliness, I mean, I think, having governance to ensure that when you review metrics, that you actually take actions to show that there is value in the partnership, there is value to have governance because you're working together to say, all right, this is behind. How do we do some catching up? What can we do together to get things back on track? And I think, that and seeing the motivation in your partner really does show the value of the governance. And as Carrie said, I think the relationship piece and how we treat each other is so important.
So that brings up a good question that maybe we can do the next poll, because it's the two-way street factor.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get input from everybody about how they feel they're getting open and honest feedback from their vendors. So can we do the next poll? It's kind of meant to trigger the next round of questions.
Just as that's pulling up, Lori, we were talking in the prep session about just, budget time, because everyone's working on budgets and how expensive clinical trials are. I think it's shocking the number of people that don't realize everything goes wrong in a clinical trial, right? Every single assumption we've ever made on the number of subjects, the number of sites, the timelines, like every single assumption we put together in a plan that you all, that we go build as a CRO and you go present to your senior leaders, every single thing is never going to happen to that plan. And, it's going to go wrong or go right. And again, if a recruitment is ahead of schedule, it does happen sometimes, then guess what? Finance is going to be shocked and surprised by those accruals. And do we have enough money in the bank to be able to, pay the investigators and all the other fees, et cetera. So,
well, and a lot of this comes from the fact that we still estimate patients we need, enrollment rates, and all of those other things by just holding our finger up in the air in a lot of situations. So until we fix that, we're always going to end up with wrong answers. What were you going to say, Marissa?
I forget now. So that's my old age show, and I forget what I was going to say.
So do we have the results yet? Or oh, well, that's kind of predictable. I kind of thought that would be the way it went.
Wow. And see, I actually thought it would be that we'd see more no's.
I did too.
Yeah.
So I'm pleasantly surprised, actually.
Well, I guess that means that we have good relationships that are two-way, right?
We're getting there. I think that's showing at least we're making progress.
Yep.
Yeah, I love Matt's chat in the chat that he put in there about two-way anonymous surveys. I think that's a very, very good way to do that.
Yeah,
I do too, Matt, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I agree. I think that is a really good way, because sometimes people, I feel like the CROs in many respects still go and some sponsors treat the CROs as if literally I'm going to tell you how to jump and you ask me how high, and that's our relationship. And that is so like 20 years ago. I don't even understand that still occurs.
Yeah.
And I think you also know when you've got a good relationship is when they start really being honest with you, right? They start telling you stuff like, we do have a resourcing issue that we're working through, or things like that. And I mean, it was always important in my former life and my current life that we are a sponsor of choice. I mean, we want to be pleasant to work with. We don't want to be a sponsor that everybody is like, oh my God, please don't award us the study. We want to be the one where people want to work with us because, one, the science is interesting, the therapeutic area is interesting, and the people they're interacting with and interfacing with on a day-to-day basis for, several years are pleasant. It may be tough times sometimes, but you're going to be pleasant about it.
So let's talk about a couple of stories about what kind of best practices have you used to set that up from the beginning?
So Lori, I think we talked about this in the prep. For me, I've really stressed to my team, even to the C-suite, that this is a partnership. We treat each other well. We succeed together. We make mistakes together, but we, in the end, take lessons learned and really apply them. And so continuing to drive that message is what's important to me, because I tell my team all the time, if you're going to push your partner around and tell them what to do, you're not going to win anything with me, right? Because I was in a situation back when I joined the industry where I had one of the sponsors not treat me well, and I said I'm never going to treat anybody like this. And I think that's helped me throughout my career be successful because I've been in the shoes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Lori, I think for me, it's really important, whether it's at the bid defense or the initial, prior to COVID, to get the teams physically together.
Yeah.
To really, break bread, have a glass of wine, really enjoy each other's company. I found that to be extremely successful in most of the relationships that we found.
Absolutely.
And Lori, I've asked, and at the bid defenses, at the kickoff meetings, I've said, if you're not willing to share with us when you have concerns, or when we're not giving you the information that would be helpful for you, or we're not giving you feedback in real time, if you're not sharing that with us, I can't give that to you. I can't help myself be a better partner for you if you're not sharing that with me. Just like I wouldn't be a good partner to you if I didn't share when, gosh, I think you missed the boat here. So I've just set the stage that this is what I expect from me. This is what you should expect from me. So the setting the expectations is not a one-way street. It's not, here's all that I want you to do, CRO. What do you need from us for you to be successful with us?
And along those lines, if I may, Lori, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think reverse metrics, I remember when AstraZeneca came out and they were pioneering that. And I remember trying to get the information and they said, no, it's proprietary. We can't give it to you. But I like that concept of reverse metrics. I wonder how many people do that. Because, as a sponsor, we should be held accountable as much as the CRO in order to meet those deliverables. So.
Well, and typically when that happens is when you haven't really taken the time to define who's doing what. So how do those clearly established roles and responsibility help you? And what does it look like when it hasn't happened? What have you done to fix it if you realized it was broken? And I'll go for either Marissa or anybody.
Well, I'll actually go back on the last topic a bit, because I think one of the things we really need to work on is language and helping study teams actually talk about how they talk about issues. I mean, I don't think all the time people are trying to dictate, but they really don't know how to talk about what's the outcome, and then what does it work for how does it work for you? And then how do we get to a solution? So I think having, it's easy to say, let's all be partners, but how do you actually do that? And I think it's really important to help the study team work through that with their language and get to more, this is what we're trying to get to. How can we do it within your systems? So I think that's a really important conversation for them to be able to have, and we have to help them do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kelly.
Yep.
And I think also being explicit, I'm sorry, Marissa, being explicit.
No,
I was just saying, being explicit, I find it, and I've been doing this a long time, that 99% of the problems come with not a clear understanding of the expectations and assumptions. And if you're very explicit about that, I think it goes a long way to healing some of that, because it's amazing every time, it's like an edict now, let's really get into what the expectations and assumptions are, because if you come together on that, you really understand each other's world, it'll be a much better place for everybody.
And this is my point, Mark, and what we talked about in the prep for this meeting was how important I personally find the kickoff meeting or the stage setting with setting the expectations. And that is on both sides. And this is not a kickoff meeting should not be a 4-hour meeting. I'm sorry, it just shouldn't. Yes, it takes time, but you have to put the time in to, garbage in, you get garbage out. If I'm just touching the surface, then that's what I should expect to get from the relationship. Like, we're just touching the surface. I'm just another number, versus I'm committing. It is that important to me to spend the time up front to talk about what we need, how we might be a small company, how we have to be nimble. I need to put it all out there, and I need them to put it out there. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. And so I think that what you put in up front is what you can carry with you throughout the whole journey together.
Well, and isn't what you put in up front actually your governance document? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Right? That's the easy trick in turning those meeting minutes into a governance document.
Yep.
It's just the personalities, the other people, just the, not spending the time to get to know people, to understand the way they communicate, whether it's, in the team meeting or in emails, et cetera. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we have pulled off world-class project managers, CRAs, and other resources that are probably some of the best people that could ever be running your trial because of a personality conflict. And, again, just, we're all different. We all communicate differently. And, I'm also from the New England area. We could be a little short and abrupt, and we just kind of boom, 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 want to get on to things. And yet, we've got other people in other parts of the world that, want to be a little more social and are a little bit slower in how they communicate things. But that, the way we communicate and how we communicate is important. And again, that going all the way back to that initial part of the conversation and building those relationships, to Mark's point, breaking bread and having a little wine, which is always a good answer to governance. But
Yeah.
Those pieces really matter. And it's shocking that people don't think it's important. And I think to Kelly's point, again, we're too busy. We got to move fast. We don't have time for that. I'm like, well, if you don't have time now, guess what? You're going to spend a lot more time.
I was going to say, you're going to spend the time either up front or all along the way with the issues that are going to arise. So for me, I'd rather spend it up front, try and set the expectations together with each other, so that there's not those surprises. That takes longer.
Yeah. I mean, I also found something that helped me with helping my company and my staff understand CROs is I spent a lot of time in a CRO, right? A lot of my career has been spent in a CRO. And so understanding the business model and the pressures that CROs experience in their life helped my team understand a little bit of how better to communicate with them, because, we have in the biotech world, we have different pressures and business models that we work under. And sometimes the two are very far apart. And you have to try to find a way to make those two things come together to deliver what needs to be done. And so I think having that understanding and explaining that to people helps them understand how they should approach a problem when it does arise.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to cover a little bit around the kinds of things you measure. And this is also somewhat related to the sample governance documents available. I don't know that there's anything standardized anywhere, but if anybody has something they would like to share, we can certainly follow up. But so what are the things the metrics that you use to measure your CRO performance? And I know there's been a huge amount of data that's been collected over COVID. How are you collecting that data? And I'll start with Kelly.
How are we collecting data from the studies or data from our?
The oversight data, the measurement of metrics, of KPIs.
Yeah, so to me, it hasn't changed due to COVID, other than we're not meeting in person. So those meetings still take place, and we still have governance meetings with minutes and metrics within those. So setting up KPIs, key performance indicators, I think is really important. I will say on the smaller smaller company side, we tend to not spend too much time on that. And I think it's a mistake. So I do try to always talk about what are some of the key performance indicators, and health of the relationship is always high on my mind. And I always have it as a governance topic, is honestly and openly, how is the health of the study team, middle management, and even at the executive level. So to me, that's one of the really big indicators. Others are financial. Those are pretty easy. And then quality.
Okay. We do have
one other thing, Lori, I want to say. At the executive steering committee level, we also had an innovation goals that we measured, because it was important that we innovated and our CRO partners were innovating with us. So we measured that, did we, if we wanted to have 2 innovations in a year, did we achieve that? And we set out kind of the target of what innovations we wanted to go after. Some were related to COVID in the COVID year. Some were related to using more big data to help drive decisions, or even preliminary setup of trials when we talk about enrollment, expectations, et cetera.
That's really great, Terry. I was just curious for the team if, in regards to decentralized clinical trials or virtual trials, is there anything nuanced that you would say about that specifically in regards to what we've been talking about just now?
As far as what you measure?
Yeah.
Well, Marissa, you want to talk about your dashboard?
I
I love your
I
dashboard.
know, I was going to bring it up too, Lori. I was glad somebody did.
It's not mine anymore, but there's a couple of people on this call, I think, like April Davis, who will know what I'm talking about. But when I was at Sarepta, we built a very robust metric system where not only we could track our oversight metrics, but during COVID, we actually had special metrics looking at missed visits, missed doses. So that, I mean, we were constantly running those almost every day because every day it was changing. But this dashboard that was built was like my dream dashboard. You know, it gave me different levels of metrics, whether it was at the study level where the study team should be reviewing, or even up until the executive level where you would talk about more difficult things, like if there are challenges with the relationship, you know, we would have different look at attrition, look at some of the issues. And I would outright ask, you know, what are we doing wrong? What can we do differently to make things better? But having a dashboard that you really can use, and it actually pulled in the CRO's data. I mean, it took us a little time to set it up, but in the end we got it. And it was just so helpful in us assessing quality too, and seeing how we were doing compared to the metrics. It was great. It's a great tool. April knows about it. If she remembers.
Wow.
And just to add to that, verse, I was going to say we also had a dashboard and we set up a data lake and pulled in data from our CRO partners. But one of the things we did, and I think Mark, you had brought this up, we trended the metrics over time. We had 3 strategic partners, and we shared that information now in a blinded fashion, but they could see that one partner may be performing better than the other 2 across the board. And it was interesting. It made them a little bit competitive, you know, because they were like, well, wait a minute, you know, I want to be on the top. You know, I think it was helpful. And I, you know, coming out of a CRO, I came from a situation where we had a strategic partnership with a very large pharma company. There were 2 of us, and they did not anonymize the data in any way. It was clear they just had 2 sets of metrics that they put on the walls of their hallways in their corporate headquarters. So you always knew where you stood against the other CRO.
Like, give us 1 or 2 examples of what those were.
Of the types of metrics or metrics specific.
Yeah.
I mean, it was things around, you know, site activations. Did you get sites up as versus planned? And then we even did some in my role in the pharma side. We actually did some kind of predictive modeling of if you get, you know, 60% of your sites up on time, how likely are you to finish your enrollment on time? So that, you know, we had a good idea of where we were going, but all of those clinical metrics that you would expect, financial metrics, like how many change in scopes had come in for each partner, things like that. So.
Yeah, and Lori, there were a couple of questions in the chat. One was about how do you measure that? How do you measure the health of a relationship? And some of those metrics fall into that. Certainly attrition is one, and that's at within that study team on both the sponsor and the CRO side. Are we seeing turnover that is higher than typical? Also surveys, just how do you measure it in terms of how do people feel? Someone said there was a 2-way survey, but oftentimes we do a survey in the beginning and then in the middle and then at the end to the team members on how they actually view the relationship. And the other one was, does the sponsor have KPIs? And
I like that.
I like that too, Tony.
Who has some examples of sponsor KPIs they would like to share?
Return around time for approval of plans and documents is a good one. Because that can always be a sticking point. Turnaround time for approval of CTA comments. Even though I work for sponsors exclusively, I think that everybody's feet needs to be held to the fire. So, when we start looking at these as partnerships, it's great to talk about partnerships, but if the only person you're holding responsible for anything is the provider, you're not really a partnership. You're still a master slave.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
So, when we should be setting out KPIs and objectives that involve both parties, and both parties should be part of meeting those objectives, not just one.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot because then you already set up the partnership because there's metrics from us too. It's great.
Oh, and it's so important. I mean, those measures and, having open, honest conversations, we were verbally told by a sponsor this week about an upcoming study. And we've been talking about it for months, and someone mentioned turnover and staffing levels. Like, our industry is not unlike any other industry, right? You can't get cars, you can't get parts for your house, you can't do remodeling, you name it. And guess what? Staffing is really difficult right now. And, if you wait until the last minute to tell us that you plan to give us some additional work, guess what our staffing is? It's going to be frantic. And we'd really like you to have a bunch of people ready in the next 30 days who are available to start the study, but we want them to have 10 years experience and 5 years of worldwide. But we're only going to give you a couple weeks warning before we tell you about this work that we're going to go do. It's awfully difficult to kind of respond to that. So again, I think measuring some of that information is also important.
But it's also for you to be able for us as sponsors to understand what your world really is. Yeah. Be able to articulate that, because it is true. I mean, this is the hardest time I've ever been in the industry to have resources. So I appreciate that. But if I knew that up front, then my bad if we don't look at that time frame that you've already said is needed.
So, but to me, that goes back to being a true partner.
That's right.
Because if you talk about that up front and you talk about your plan for what's going to happen should somebody need to be replaced on a project, then it's all ready instead of a secret mission after the fact.
And if we're doing governance, we should be sharing our pipeline anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we should be doing truly early engagement, right? It shouldn't be 3 weeks before the trial's about to start. It should be 6 months. And we should be discussing, what types of things each side can bring to the table that's going to make the trial successful. And if resourcing is going to be a challenge, maybe there's another way to do the trial. Maybe we should be talking about STV levels and SDR and things that, could cut down on the resources needed.
Heavens, no.
Well,
Risk-based monitoring?
Yeah.
We're going to do less than 100% SDV?
Oh, please don't start me down that. Do not start me there, Tony.
Oh boy.
I think the other thing is, your CRO probably knows more about you and your pipeline and your company than you may think they do. And it's, maybe for a small biotech, everybody's aware, but I was on a call this week telling someone, like, we're doing your real world evidence studies, your phase 3 studies and your phase 1 studies, and we know more about your drug and the mismatch in the way it's being developed and the plans for development inside your company than you do yourself, because those groups aren't talking to each other, right? And so, I think we can provide similar value. It's something that I learned a number of years ago from one of our CTAs. And they said, if you really want to know who your best CRAs are, talk to us, because we are the worker bees that are doing all the work, and you should have us ranking all your CRAs as to who's good and who's not. It's interesting to think about who really knows who's performing well at the sponsor level and at the CRO.
Well, and that's really that absolutely is the rationale for having a management or senior leadership panel that isn't in the day-to-day, so that there can be that kind of conversation, and it's not going to necessarily impact the team. Yeah. We did have one question that we haven't really unpacked, but I think it would be valuable because we're coming up to the top of the hour. What do you end up with in your trial master file that documents that you've done governance, so that when you're going to get inspected, you've got something there? That's the hardest thing. You do all these things, but what do you put in the files?
Well, we actually put the meeting minutes, the KPIs, the issue tracker for things that have been escalated to the JOC or the ESC, and the resolution of those things.
So
and we went
a big folder.
through. Well, yeah, but we went through 3 inspections in 2 years. So, and we could show good governance and oversight. And we also included all the oversight activities. So we actually had an oversight group that would go out and do co-visits and stuff.
Yeah.
All of those reports are in the files too.
Yep. And your oversight plan detailing how you're going to escalate things, all of that would go into the TMF. Very
charters,
similar. Yep.
Everything.
Yep. All of your charters, your DMC charters, your oversight charters, any of that. But the meeting minutes are big, any action logs, decision logs, so that you can see who made what decisions when, and then following up on the action items and documenting that.
Okay.
We do have some, when we have multiple studies and multiple programs and larger, kind of mid-sized customers, we do end up with some things that don't get documented. So again, we do have some conversations about personalities and about, behaviors on both sides, both sponsor and CRO. And we keep, we have different levels of meeting minutes, and some of those high level small group, we do talk about, the individual performance of folks. And, we also spend a lot of time trying to figure out who needs to be rewarded, right? Who did something that was fantastic within the project, whether on the sponsor side or the CRO side, and, getting to a point where you jointly acknowledge and reward people for going above and beyond. And more importantly, sharing those behaviors and the reason the person was rewarded with everybody else, helps drive the right kind of culture.
I think thank you goes a very long way in recognizing top performance. I try to do that as much as I can to thank both teams, the partner and my own team, because that keeps them motivated and they know that you as a leader are listening and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we had implemented a program where the CRO partners could be nominated for awards, just like the internal staff. And we made a big deal of it and had our CMO sign a certificate. And typically he did town hall meetings at the CROs 4 times a year, and he would go through the list of people who had been awarded something and for what.
Oh, that's great.
One of the things that I've done in the past for operational governance that works really well is both the sponsor and the provider, when they come to the governance meeting, they put together a slate of nominees for an award. And we simply just do a certificate. Everybody on the governance board signs a certificate. We frame it, send it to them with like a $50 American Express gift card. And it goes a long way towards building teamwork. And that kind of stuff gets to the turnover as well, because if people feel like they're appreciated and they feel like they're part of something, they're far less likely to start even looking for another job, let alone leave the company. So I think that, working together to be the sponsor or program of choice to have people feel as though their contribution is recognized is a big, at least in my view, is a big part of governance.
Yeah, I think the recognition is a big component that can't be overlooked, is just recognizing and acknowledging people for what they've done and, the good that they've done. And quite honestly, in my experience, it goes farther than those gift cards. That acknowledgement, that public recognition is meaningful to people. They feel like, they've been heard, they've been seen. And I think we just can't overlook that.
That's a great point. I know for our company, we have an internal, I forgot the name of it, I think it's Reflective, where we as managers are given like 4,500 points every quarter to give out as we see fit. And I was just thinking as we were talking, what a great idea might be to have one that you could share with the CRO. And so individuals within each team could just, naturally decide, I want to just recognize somebody. That goes a long way of just seeing that public recognition. That might be a nice idea to try.
Yeah.
I also think that one thing that I've seen done, it was an idea that someone had at one of my companies, is we actually recorded a patient who had come into the company to talk to us, the staff, as we do. And someone had a great idea. Let's share that video with our partners. And it really drove things home, both from a motivational and an emotional level to really understand that our partner does add value. You know, it's and make them feel more connected to the patient, right? So I found that to be such a great opportunity to really motivate teams.
It's great. Excellent.
I think the other, there's lots of sponsors out there that want to spend a lot of time on, penalties, bonus malus conversations. In fact, we probably spend more time in contract negotiations on bonus malus than we do on governance and setting up a proper relationship, which is sad. But I think the smart CROs and the smart partners are the ones that spend the time on saying, hey, what is it we're trying to achieve? And a lot of them will spend extra money on, project level bonuses. Like if I can get a CRA to stay on my project through the end, I mean, I'm a CRO, I have turnover, that's a given. But what's more important is the key roles that are on your project and getting them to stick through all the way through the project. And, why would a sponsor or a CRO not want to put their money where their mouth is and incentivize those people to go do it? And we've had anywhere from 100% funded by the sponsor, 50-50 by the sponsor and the CRO, but I think some pretty creative ways to say, hey, let's pay meaningful dollars to the teams to execute properly. And again, that makes you more attractive as a sponsor to be, this is the kind of project I want to work on. Unless you're mean and then they want to come off your project, and then we may not tell you unless we built that relationship. We might not tell you why they're leaving your project.
I was going to say from my 100 years ago job as a CRA, I wanted to be on the projects that meant something, but also had a really nice sponsor. Yeah. And when the sponsor was a pain to work with, that's the one you want to get off of. So. Yeah. I know that we all know that, but we don't necessarily know when things go awry. And sometimes it could just be that somebody's really inexperienced in managing the project or the relationship and doesn't really get how important it is to set the stage for a better quality relationship where you are partnering.
Yeah.
Any few last comments? This could easily be 2 hours.
I know it really could. There's several questions that have come in that I'm not convinced we've answered really, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, we'll take the chat. I think we'll come up with some follow-ups and we'll maybe document and we'll pass around to the.
That would be great, Peter, because there's some great questions in there, and I don't want people to feel like they didn't have a question, their questions weren't answered. So I think that would be really helpful.
I think so too.
And Lori, I'm willing to share KPIs that we've used. I don't think there's anything proprietary about KPIs. We all have something similar, but I'd be glad to share mine.
Yeah, and any governance documents, Lori, I can take a look at ours. We're just putting ours in place, so but I'll take a look at what we started to put and see. I'm happy to share that if I can, just redact any private information.
Also, if there's any partnership manuals, I know that's an interest that we have. If, outside of the governance, say charter, are people using partnership partnership documents outside or part of their MSAs or outside of their MSAs would be helpful to understand.
And I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Avoca Quality Consortium, AQC, but if you partner with them, it's not a lot of money, but the amount of templates you get that you have access to with even guidance is phenomenal. Like, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. If you can,
that's the same thing with Avoca, right? Like they have a lot of templates. So I'll see if I can pull anything from ours and be happy to share that with folks.
Yeah, me too.
That's the other pronunciation of Avoca. Same group, different pronunciation.
Same thing. Yes.
I want to ask one last question, which is, would love to know who should drive the governance and at what level from both the CRO and the sponsor. That's a really good way to close.
Say that question one more time, Lori. I'm so sorry.
Would love to know who should drive the governance and at what level from both the CRO and the sponsor.
So my opinion is it needs to be in ClinOps because I think outsourcing has a different function. And you really need to put someone at a director or senior director level to drive it because they need to be able to work in the organization up as well as down. But it needs to be a focus and a dedicated resource.
a senior who's really dedicated to cleanups. Okay.
Yeah. And we have a separate unit. I mean, my unit is called Clinical Procurement and Outsourcing. And so we are responsible for the governance. And I have category managers that are responsible for each of their categories to do those governance meetings.
Good. Anybody different answer?
I think it depends on the size. Again, I think it's definitely on the ClinOps, ClinDev side, depending on, it's in some of my companies there, that's the same person. It's got to be someone who has experience and really knows how to drive a partnership. And it's a pretty senior level for the executive.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would definitely loop in the business operations or vendor manager, whatever it's called in your company, to partner with, because although they have a different perspective, I think it's a good perspective that they bring to the table as well.
That's great. I'd just like to thank all of you, and especially like to thank Peter and the team for bringing this up and getting this moving, because it's been an excellent conversation. I hope we have future conversations, and thanks to all of our panelists for their wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.